Hey guys, tonight we are doing something that will either make you nostalgic or make you feel deeply relieved that you live in the era you do. We are talking about dating, not the modern swipe left, ghost someone after 3 days kind of dating. I mean the whole arc, from the days when you had to sit in someone's parlor being evaluated by their mother like a piece of furniture at an estate sale, all the way to right now, where your entire romantic future can be decided by a blurry photo and whether you listed your height correctly. Tonight we are asking the important questions. Did people in the 1800s actually enjoy courting? Or were they just performing enjoyment because a chaperone was watching? What was flirting before texting? What was rejection before being left unread? And what exactly did we lose when romance stopped being a slow, candlelit ritual and became something you could do on your phone in a waiting room? Let us begin. Long before anyone expected to feel butterflies, marriage was simply a contract, practical, businesslike, and about as emotionally charged as agreeing on the price of grain. In most ancient and medieval societies, the idea that you might actually like the person you were bound to for life was considered a charming bonus at best and a dangerous distraction at worst. Parents arranged matches based on land, wealth, alliances, and social standing. You are, say, 16 years old. Your father sits you down and informs you that you will be marrying the son of the neighboring landowner, a young man you may have seen twice and spoken to perhaps once. There is no conversation about compatibility. No one asks how you feel, and here is the thing that is hard to sit with from a modern vantage point. This was not considered cruel, it was considered responsible. Love, in the medieval understanding, was something that happened after marriage, if you were lucky. It was not the foundation. It was, at best, a pleasant afterthought. If there is one figure who has done more unsung damage to the early stages of romance than any other in history, it is the chaperone, that watchful, usually older, frequently bored third party, whose entire job was to make sure nothing interesting ever happened between two people who wanted nothing more than to talk alone for 5 minutes. In the Victorian era, no respectable young woman could be left unchaperoned with a man she was not related to, which meant that the beginning stages of courtship played out as a kind of absurdist theater, with everyone performing their best version of polite indifference while secretly hoping the chaperone would fall asleep. The rules were elaborate and somewhat deranged. A young woman could not walk unchaperoned with a man. She could not ride in a closed carriage with him alone. She certainly could not be alone with him after dark under any circumstances whatsoever, unless she was comfortable with having her reputation destroyed before breakfast. What this produced was a generation of young people who became extraordinarily skilled at communicating through indirection. You could not say what you meant, so you said something else entirely. A brushed hand while passing a teacup became significant enough to think about for 3 days in the 19th century. If you were interested in someone, You did not send them a message. You sent a calling card, a small formally printed rectangle of cardstock bearing your name, sometimes your address, and absolutely nothing else. No context, no explanation, no indication of your feelings, just your name, hand-delivered by a servant, placed on a silver tray, and left to do all the emotional heavy lifting on its own. If the lady of the house chose not to receive you, her servant would relay that she was not at home. This was almost always a fiction. She was frequently at home. She simply did not wish to see you. But the fiction was maintained with such rigorous consistency that it became a social standard. You nodded, took your hat, and laughed, understanding without being told that you would been evaluated and found insufficient if you were received. You were shown into the parlor and given approximately 15 to 30 minutes in which to make your case. 15 minutes. That was your window. Modern first dates last at least an hour and still feel insufficient. These people were expected to determine marital potential in the time it takes to watch half an episode of a television show before the read receipt existed to destroy people emotionally. There was the love letter, a carefully composed, sometimes agonizingly crafted piece of paper that traveled at the speed of a horse and arrived eventually at the hands of the person you were trying not to seem too desperate about. You could not unsend it. You could not softly edit it the morning after. Whatever you wrote in ink in your own hand was now a permanent document. Writing a love letter, well, was a skill, and not a trivial one. A badly written love letter did not just fail to impress. It actively worked against you. The waiting was its own particular torture. You wrote the letter. You sealed it with wax. You sent it. And then you waited. Days, sometimes a week, if the distance was significant, during which time you had absolutely no way of knowing whether it had arrived, whether it had been read, or whether your carefully chosen words had landed as intended. What love letters gave you that no subsequent technology has quite replicated was a sense of the person on the page. Handwriting was individual in a way that a typed message is not. When Napoleon wrote to Josephine from military campaigns, rambling, obsessive, occasionally grammatically alarming letters that she mostly did not reply to promptly, you could feel the man through the ink. In the 19th century, when the rules of polite society made it nearly impossible to express a genuine emotion directly, people got creative. They developed an entire system of coded communication using flowers, a practice known as floriography, in which each bloom carried a specific meaning. A red rose meant passionate love, which everyone knows, but a yellow rose meant jealousy or a dying affection. A forget-me-not meant true love. A striped carnation meant refusal. The implications of getting this wrong were significant. You could send someone a carefully assembled bouquet that you believe communicated warmth and admiration, and inadvertently convey that you were jealous, resentful, and considering ending things. The flowers were a language, but like all languages, they were subject to regional variations and the ever-present problem of the sender and receiver having read different editions of the dictionary. For much of the 18th and 19th centuries, the formal dance was one of the few genuinely exciting social occasions at which young men and women could interact in a semi-supervised but physically proximal way, and the waltz, which required partners to hold each other at the waist and look directly at each other while moving, was considered so dangerously intimate when it first appeared that more than one commentator described it as scandalous. The dance card was the social technology deployed to manage all of this. A full card meant you were in demand. A conspicuously empty card was a public humiliation. The conversation that happened during the dance itself was constrained by the movement but liberated by the noise and the proximity. You could say things in 3 minutes of a waltz that might take 3 parlor visits to approach by other means. The 1920s did not gently nudge courtship customs in a new direction. They detonated them in the space of a single decade. The chaperone parlor visit gave way to the unsupervised automobile ride. The slow FAFTA, coded exchange of calling cards, gave way to the direct, often startlingly frank communication of a generation that had watched a world war kill off an entire cohort of young men and decided that waiting politely was no longer a viable strategy. The automobile provided something that courtship had never previously had: genuine privacy. A young couple who drove together out of town existed temporarily in a space where nobody knew where they were and nobody could see what they were doing. Parents were alarmed. Clergy were alarmed. Social commentators wrote extensively about the automobile as a moral hazard. None of it made the slightest difference because the freedom the automobile offered was real. By the 1950s, American courtship had evolved into a highly ritualized system of its own. Going steady, the exclusive formalized arrangement by which a young couple declared themselves to be each other's and only each other's, was announced, symbolized, and marked by the transfer of a class ring or a leather jacket. Items worn visibly by the girl to communicate to everyone around her that she was taken. The whole system was a social broadcast, and its terms were understood by everyone. Returning a leather jacket or a ring was a breakup in material form. You did not just stop seeing someone, you gave back the object publicly, which meant the termination of the relationship was as visible as its beginning had been. There was no ambiguous fade. There was no soft ghosting. There was a return of property and a social fact, the community around you processed in real time. The domestic telephone, which began appearing in middle-class American homes in the early 20th century, changed courtship in ways that its inventors certainly did not intend. For the first time in history, two people who were interested in each other could speak directly, in real time, without being in the same physical space. This was thrilling and also immediately terrifying because calling someone you liked required you to pick up the phone, dial the number, and wait while it rang, knowing that any member of their household might answer. The parental interception was one of the great underappreciated anxieties of mid-century courtship. The telephone was in the kitchen or the hallway, somewhere in the household's shared space with no privacy and excellent acoustics. You did not call too early. You did not call too late. You did not call too late. You did not call too frequently because frequent calls implied a desperation that was considered unattractive. 2 or 3 times a week was considered appropriate for a developing relationship. More than that was discussed. If any single technology has reshaped the daily texture of romantic pursuit more thoroughly than anything that preceded it, it is the text message. That small, immediate, infinitely rereadable communication that made it possible to be in near constant contact with someone you were interested in, and by the same token, made it possible to feel the withdrawal of that contact with a precision that no previous generation had ever experienced. The text thread became a record of a relationship's emotional temperature. Hot when responses came quickly, worrying when they slowed. Catastrophically cold when they stopped entirely. People began reading, meaning to response times, punctuation choices, the presence or absence of emoji. The read receipt was a particular instrument of modern romantic torment. A small notification that informed you not only that your message had been delivered, but that it had been opened, read, and then not responded to. Previous generations had their own versions of unreturned communication, but they came with a built-in period of plausible deniability. Perhaps it had not arrived yet. Perhaps they would been busy. The red receipt eliminated all of that. They had read it. It was 11 minutes ago. They were not typing. Tinder launched in 2013, and within a few years, the gesture of swiping right or left on the photograph had become one of the defining acts of modern romantic life. What Tinder did to courtship was not simply to make meeting strangers easier. Though it did that, it changed the architecture of the decision. It transformed the first encounter from a social event with context, unpredictability, and the presence of other people into a solo sorting exercise conducted in private at any hour, based almost entirely on a photograph. The design was deliberately, brilliantly, frictionless. You looked at a photograph. You made a snap judgment. You swiped. The whole decision took less time than it takes to read this sentence. The design drew explicitly on the mechanics of slot machines and variable reward systems. The occasional match, arriving unpredictably, producing a small dopamine spike that encouraged continued use. The app was engineered to be compelling. It was extremely good at what it was engineered to do. What it was not engineered to do was produce relationships, which turned out to be a different project entirely. At some point in the history of modern dating, a new practice emerged that was not entirely new in substance, but new in its pervasiveness, its name, and the degree to which it came to be understood as a recognized mode of ending things: ghosting. The practice of simply ceasing all communication with someone you would be romantically involved with without explanation, without a conversation. The person who has been ghosted is left in a peculiar limbo that earlier forms of rejection had not created: a formal letter of refusal, a telephone call ending things, even the return of a leather jacket, all communicated something specific. They said, "This is over, and I am the one ending it." Ghosting communicates nothing specific. It could mean a dozen things. The disappearance, in a modern context, is total. There's no community gossip to fill the silence. There is only the thread, and the timestamp of the last message read, sitting there like a small precise monument to something that apparently did not mean enough to be ended properly. Somewhere between the calling card, left on a silver tray, and the profile photo swiped past in half a second, something changed about how romantic attention was offered and received. The old courtship rituals were slow, often stifling, deeply unequal in ways that disadvantaged women at almost every turn, and built on social structures that benefited the powerful at the expense of everyone else. No one with a clear view of the Victorian marriage market is arguing for its return. But what those slow rituals did, sometimes in spite of everything wrong with them, was impose a kind of deliberateness. The calling card cost effort and social exposure. The love letter cost vulnerability and the permanent record of your feelings in your own handwriting. The going steady pin cost a public declaration of preference made visibly and irrevocably in a community that would remember it. Each of these things required the person doing them to commit to the act, to put something at stake, to make a gesture that could not be easily retracted. The commitment preceded the certainty. You had to mean it before you knew whether it would work. Modern romantic technology has largely eliminated that cost structure. The swipe costs nothing. The match costs nothing. The opening message costs almost nothing. The signal that effort and exposure once provided has been diluted by the ease with which the gestures are now made. So, here you are, at the end of a very long story about a very human problem. The problem of finding someone in a world full of people and convincing them to stay. Think about the woman in the Victorian parlor sitting upright in an uncomfortable chair, trying to communicate genuine feeling through the only channels available to her. A chosen word, a particular glance. Think about the man on the frontier, writing a letter to a stranger, hundreds of miles away, sending it into the silence, waiting weeks for a reply that might never come. Think about the teenager in the 1980s, standing in the kitchen with the phone in their hand, rehearsing what they were going to say, dialing, hearing it ring, and feeling their heart do that specific thing that hearts do when the line picks up. They were all doing the same thing. You have done the same thing. Everyone around you has done or is doing right now, somewhere, in whatever form the current moment makes available, reaching towards someone, hoping to be reached back. History tends to record the grand things, the wars, the revolutions, the collapsing empires. It is less diligent about recording the Tuesday evenings when someone worked up the courage to say something honest to another person, and the other person said something honest back, and something began said. They were, all of them, just trying to find the person worth finding, and somehow, stubbornly, generation after generation, they kept on trying. Sleep well,